Marcus Thorne surveyed the grand ballroom, a self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. The annual Thorne and Associates Charity Gala was a triumph of polished surfaces and calculated opulence. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto the gleaming marble floors, and the air, thick with expensive perfume and the low hum of influential conversations, was the very atmosphere of success. To Marcus, this was not just a party, it was a performance, a confirmation of his place at the apex of the city's architectural landscape. He was a king in his court, and every clinking champagne flute, every deferential nod from a junior colleague, was a note in his personal symphony of power. His wife Clarissa stood beside him, a statuesque vision in sapphire silk, her posture as rigid and flawless as one of her husband's steel and glass towers. Their son Julian drifted through the crowd, radiating the unearned confidence of a young man who had never known a door to be closed to him. Across the room, a quiet disruption occurred. A woman, older and dressed in clothes that spoke of thrift stores and long years of wear, moved unsteadily through the glittering assembly. Her gray coat was threadbare at the cuffs, and she leaned heavily on a simple wooden cane, each step a careful negotiation with gravity. She was trying to navigate toward a small, unoccupied table near the wall when her cane caught on the plush leg of a velvet rope stanchion. She stumbled, a small gasp escaping her lips, and the plastic cup of water in her hand flew from her grasp, its contents splashing across the pristine floor a few feet from Clarissa Thorne's designer heels. The reaction was immediate and venomous. "Good heavens, watch where you're going," Clarissa snapped, her voice a whip crack in the sophisticated murmur of the room. She took a half-step back, her face contorted in a mask of disgust, as if the water itself were a contaminant. Julian, ever his mother's echo, sneered. "Security should have done a better job of keeping the riffraff out. This is a private event, not a soup kitchen." The older woman flushed with shame, her hands trembling as she tried to right herself. I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice thin and frail. "It was an accident." Marcus Thorne didn't even deign to speak to her. He caught the eye of a passing waiter and made a sharp, dismissive gesture toward the woman and the puddle on the floor, an unspoken command to clean up the mess and remove the source of the ugliness. He had already turned away, his attention drawn back to a conversation with a city councilman, the incident erased from his mind as utterly insignificant. To him, the woman was not a person. She was a momentary glitch in the flawless presentation of his evening. From his position near a service entrance, Leo Vance saw the entire exchange. He was supposed to be coordinating with the catering staff, a menial task Marcus had assigned him with a wave of his hand, but his eyes had been drawn to the woman's slow, careful progress across the room. He had felt a pang of sympathy for her obvious discomfort amidst such aggressive wealth. Now, watching the casual cruelty of the Thorne family, that sympathy hardened into a quiet, cold anger. He moved without hesitation. Ignoring the withering glare from Clarissa, Leo crossed the floor and knelt beside the older woman. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice low and gentle. "Don't you worry about the water." The woman looked up at him, her eyes a surprisingly clear and intelligent blue, filled with a mixture of gratitude and humiliation. "Thank you, young man. I'm just so clumsy." "Not at all," Leo said, offering her a steadying hand. "These floors can be tricky." He helped her to her feet, ensuring she was stable before he addressed the spill. He pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket, a simple, practical habit, and efficiently wiped up the water, his movements economical and precise. He then straightened up and offered the woman a warm, reassuring smile. "Let me get you a fresh glass of water and find you a comfortable place to sit." He guided her to a quiet chair in an alcove, far from the judging eyes of the central crowd. He returned a moment later with a glass of water, not in a plastic cup, but in a heavy crystal tumbler from the main bar. He handed it to her carefully. "There you go. Please, enjoy the rest of your evening." He made no show of his kindness. It was a simple, reflexive act of human decency, offered without expectation of reward or recognition. He gave her a final, small nod and turned to walk away, melting back into the background. Marcus Thorne believed he was at the pinnacle of his career, a titan of industry surrounded by the monuments of his own making. He didn't know that the frail, shabby woman his wife had just insulted was Eleanora Blackwood, the widow of the reclusive philanthropist Arthur Blackwood, the sole heir to the largest fortune in the state, and the final, decisive voice on the very architectural project that would define his legacy. He was utterly blind to the fact that his entire world, so carefully constructed on a foundation of arrogance and influence, would be systematically dismantled within 3 short months. And it would be done by the quiet, unassuming draftsman he barely even knew, the young man who had just shown a kindness that would prove to be more powerful than all the Thorne family's wealth and connections combined. If you're watching this, you probably know what it feels like to see someone being treated unfairly. You feel that fire in your gut, that wish that someone, somewhere, would finally set things right. We love stories like that, and we're going to tell you one today. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy seeing arrogance meet its match, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that remind us that true character is what you do when you think no one important is watching. Leo Vance's presence at Thorne & Associates was a quiet anomaly. In an office that prized aggressive ambition and glossy self-promotion, Leo was an island of calm neutrality. He was 28, but he carried himself with the steady composure of a much older man. His work was impeccable, his drafts clean, his calculations precise, but he never drew attention to it. He arrived on time, he left on time, and he performed every task assigned to him with a quiet diligence that his superiors mistook for a lack of ambition. They saw his simple, functional clothing, his modest lunch packed from home, and his polite refusal to join in the cynical office gossip, and they filed him away in a mental box labeled plodder. A reliable cog, but a cog nonetheless. This assessment could not have been more wrong. Leo held a master's degree in architecture from one of the most prestigious universities in the country, graduating at the top of his class. He had won the coveted Alistair Finch Fellowship for his postgraduate work on sustainable urban design, a prize that came with enough funding to start his own small firm. But he hadn't. Instead, he had taken this junior draftsman position at the firm of Marcus Thorne, a man whose work he considered to be soulless and derivative. His reasons were his own, rooted in a promise to his late mentor, a brilliant but unsung architect named Samuel Bell. Bell had been a contemporary of Marcus Thorne's father, a man he respected as a true artist, but he had watched Marcus twist his father's legacy into a corporate brand, prioritizing profit over people and spectacle over substance. "Watch him, Leo," Samuel had said in his final days, his voice raspy. "Learn how not to build. Learn how arrogance becomes a structural flaw, not just in a building, but in a man. Then when you're ready, show them how it's done." So Leo watched, and he learned. He treated his time at the firm as an anthropological study, observing the dynamics of power and the corrosion of ego. The office was a daily masterclass in casual condescension. Julian Thorne, who held the title of project lead despite having a flimsy portfolio and a profound lack of imagination, treated Leo like a personal assistant. He would toss files onto Leo's desk without a word, interrupt him mid-sentence, and refer to him in meetings as our drafting guy. The deepest cuts, however, came from Marcus himself. They were rarely overt, more often delivered as subtle dismissals that were designed to undermine and diminish. One Tuesday afternoon, the firm was working on a proposal for a new community library. It was a relatively small project, but one that genuinely interested Leo. He spent a weekend sketching ideas, developing a concept that integrated the building with a small park, using natural light and sustainable materials to create a space that felt welcoming and alive. It was a design that listened to the needs of the community it was meant to serve. On Monday morning, he found a rare moment when Marcus was alone in his glass-walled office, reviewing a set of blueprints. Taking a breath, Leo knocked softly on the doorframe. Marcus looked up, his expression one of mild annoyance. "What is it, Vance?" "Sir, about the library proposal," Leo began, holding out his sketchbook. "I had a few thoughts on the initial concept, particularly regarding the green space integration. I think we could create something really special." Marcus didn't even glance at the sketchbook. He waved a dismissive hand, his eyes already returning to the blueprints on his desk. "We have a team for that. Julian is heading it up. They're aiming for something bold, iconic, a statement piece. Your focus is on the structural drafts for the Miller account. Let's not get distracted by flights of fancy." The phrase hung in the air, flights of fancy. It was a clear message. Your ideas are childish, irrelevant. You are not one of the creators, you are one of the technicians. Leo felt the familiar, dull sting of the dismissal, but his face remained a mask of professional calm. "Understood, sir." He retreated from the office, the unspoken rebuke echoing in his ears. 2 days later, during a team meeting for the library project, Julian unveiled his vision. He presented a digital rendering of a stark, angular building that looked more like a corporate fortress than a community library. But as he spoke, Leo felt a strange sense of déjà vu. Julian was talking about a central atrium designed to maximize natural light and a terraced garden on the roof that would connect the building to the adjacent park. They were Leo's core ideas, stripped of their subtlety and humanity, repackaged in a gaudy, egotistical design, and presented as Julian's own stroke of genius. Leo looked across the table at Julian, who pointedly avoided his gaze. Marcus beamed at his son, clapping him on the shoulder. "Brilliant, son! That's the kind of bold thinking that puts Thorne and Associates on the map." No one else in the room said a word. They had all seen Leo's sketches, which he had shared with a few colleagues in the drafting department. They knew. But in the rigid hierarchy of the firm, speaking up would be career suicide. Leo felt their sympathetic, helpless glances, but he offered nothing in return. He simply sat, his hands resting in his lap, his expression unreadable. Inside, however, he was not angry. He was something far more dangerous. He was observant. He filed the incident away, another piece of data in his ongoing study of Marcus Thorne. He knew his time would come. Later that day, sitting at his small drafting table, he allowed his hand to drift down to the worn leather portfolio that rested against the leg of his desk. He touched the soft, aged leather, its surface scarred with the marks of travel and time. It had been a gift from Samuel Bell. Inside were his real designs, his true work, waiting for the right moment. The portfolio was his silent promise to his mentor and to himself. The Thorne saw a shabby case. He felt the weight of his future. The announcement landed in the office with the force of an earthquake. The Blackwood Foundation, the state's largest and most revered philanthropic organization, was commissioning a new headquarters. It was to be more than just an office building. It was to be a landmark, a physical embodiment of the foundation's mission of service, integrity, and community empowerment. The budget was virtually unlimited, but the expectations were astronomical. For any architect, this was the project of a lifetime, a chance to create a legacy. For Marcus Thorne, it was an obsession. "This is it," he declared, standing before his senior staff, his eyes gleaming with a feverish light. "The Blackwood project is not just another contract. It is our destiny. It is the jewel in the crown of this firm." His entire focus shifted. All other projects were sidelined, delegated to junior managers. The firm's resources were marshaled for a single purpose: to win the Blackwood contract. Marcus became a man possessed. He spent his days in endless meetings, his nights poring over the history of the Blackwood family, trying to divine the secret to winning their favor. He assembled his A-team, a collection of the firm's most sycophantic and self-important designers, led, of course, by Julian. They were to be the visionaries, the masterminds. Leo Vance, despite his demonstrable skill, was pointedly excluded. His role was defined in a brief, humiliating conversation in the main studio. "Vance," Marcus said, not even bothering to look up from the site plans spread across a massive table. "I need you to handle the logistics for the Blackwood team. Keep their coffee fresh, make sure the printers are stocked, coordinate their schedules. We need our best minds focused entirely on the creative work, without any distractions." The message was brutally clear. You are a servant, not a creator. You are here to facilitate the important work of important people. The other architects in the room exchanged uncomfortable glances. It was a public and deliberate demotion, a reinforcement of Leo's perceived status as the office nobody. Leo simply nodded. "Of course, Mr. Thorne." His voice was even, betraying no hint of the insult's sting. He accepted the role with the same quiet dignity with which he did everything, a response that seemed to frustrate Marcus more than any argument would have. The Thorne residence, a sprawling, minimalist mansion in the city's most exclusive suburb, became the secondary headquarters for the project. The atmosphere within its sterile, white walls was thick with ambition and anxiety. One evening, Marcus and Clarissa sat in their living room, a space that resembled an art gallery more than a home. Marcus paced back and forth, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand, ranting about his vision. "It has to be a monument," he said, his voice ringing with self-importance. "A testament to Arthur Blackwood's genius. People need to see it from the freeway and know that something important happens there. It needs to project power, influence, strength." Clarissa, elegantly reclined on a white leather sofa, nodded in agreement. Arthur Blackwood was a powerful man. He wouldn't want some meek, humble little building. He was a titan. The headquarters should reflect that. Their conversation revealed their profound misunderstanding of the very man they sought to honor. They spoke of Arthur Blackwood as if they knew him, but their knowledge was a shallow composite of Forbes articles and society gossip. They knew of his immense wealth, but they knew nothing of his character. They were completely ignorant of the fact that he had lived modestly, despised ostentation, and had built his foundation on the principle of quiet dignity. They mocked the foundation's focus on grassroots programs, dismissing them as sentimental trifles. "All that nonsense about serving the little people," Clarissa said with a delicate sniff. "It's a lovely sentiment for the brochures, I suppose. But at the end of the day, power respects power. The board will be impressed by a show of strength, not a handout." Marcus stopped his pacing and pointed a finger at her, a triumphant look on his face. "Exactly. That's what Julian understands. His preliminary concepts are magnificent, bold, unapologetic. It's exactly what they'll be looking for." They were building a cathedral to their own egos, planning to stamp the Thorne name onto the Blackwood legacy. They were so blinded by their own ambition that they couldn't see the truth, that they were designing a building for a man they didn't know, to impress a woman they had already scorned, in a competition they had already lost. They were architects drawing up the blueprints of their own downfall. While the lights at Thorne and Associates burned late into the night, fueled by caffeine and arrogance, Leo Vance worked quietly in his own space. His apartment was small, a modest one-bedroom in a quiet, older building, far from the city's glittering center. But what it lacked in square footage, it made up for in character. The walls were lined not with framed prints of his own work, but with bookshelves crammed with volumes on sociology, urban planning, classical philosophy, and environmental science. It was the library of a man who understood that architecture was not about buildings, but about people. On a large, simple wooden table that dominated his living room, he had unrolled his own set of plans for the Blackwood Foundation headquarters. He had started them the day the project was announced, working from a place of deep respect for Arthur Blackwood's true philosophy, which he had studied for years as part of his postgraduate fellowship. His design was the antithesis of the Thorn vision. It was not a monument to power, but a sanctuary of purpose. The building was low-slung and elegant, designed to blend with the surrounding landscape rather than dominate it. It incorporated natural materials, reclaimed wood, local stone, living walls of green foliage. The heart of the building was not a grand, intimidating atrium, but a sunlit central courtyard, open to the public, with gardens and quiet seating areas. It was a building that invited people in, a structure that listened, that served, that sheltered. It was a physical manifestation of quiet dignity. One evening, as he was refining the details of the passive heating and cooling system, his phone buzzed. The number was unlisted. He answered cautiously. "Hello? Is this Leo Vance?" The voice was female, calm and cultured, with a familiar timbre he couldn't quite place. "It is. To whom am I speaking?" "My name is Eleonora," the voice said, omitting her surname. "We met briefly at a gala a few weeks ago. You were very kind to me when I had a little accident." Leo's mind instantly flashed back to the spilled water, the cruel faces of the Thorns, and the frail, humiliated woman with the cane. "I remember," he said, his voice warming. "I hope you enjoyed the rest of your evening." "I did, thanks to you," she replied. "I was told you are an architect. A very good one, according to some." There was a brief pause. "I have a deep interest in architecture. My late husband was a great admirer of thoughtful design. I was wondering if I might be so bold as to ask to see some of your work sometime. Your personal work, I mean." Leo was taken aback. The request was unusual, but her tone was so genuine that he felt no suspicion. He thought of his portfolio, filled with the designs that truly represented him. "I would be honored," he said. "Excellent," Eleanor replied. "I will be in touch to arrange a time." She hung up, leaving Leo staring at his phone, a strange sense of fate settling over him. He didn't know her full name, or that she was the chairwoman of the Blackwood Foundation. He only knew that a moment of simple kindness had opened an unexpected door. Back at the office, the pressure was mounting. The deadline for the preliminary design submission was fast approaching. Julian, buckling under the weight of expectations he was ill-equipped to handle, grew more erratic and tyrannical. One night, the core team was working late, reviewing the final structural plans for Julian's ostentatious design. Leo, tasked with checking the load-bearing calculations, found a critical error. Julian's design, in its quest for a dramatic, unsupported overhang, had overlooked a fundamental principle of physics. The flaw was significant enough that, under the right conditions, it could lead to a catastrophic failure. He approached the problem with his usual, quiet tact. He didn't announce the error to the room. Instead, he walked over to where Julian and Marcus were standing over the main blueprint. "Excuse me, Julian," he said softly. "I was running the stress simulations on the cantilevered entrance. I have a question about the steel reinforcement specifications here." He pointed to the specific section. "My numbers suggest we might need to increase the tensile strength by at least 40%, or perhaps introduce a supporting column here." He phrased it as a question, a humble inquiry, giving Julian an opportunity to save face. But Julian, his ego already frayed, saw it as a direct challenge to his authority. "Are you questioning my design, Vance?" he snapped, his voice rising. Before Leo could answer, Marcus stepped in. His face was dark with anger. He wasn't angry about the potential flaw. He was angry that Leo had dared to find it. "He's not questioning your design, Julian," Marcus growled, his eyes fixed on Leo. "He's overstepping his bounds. Your job, Vance, is to run the numbers we give you. Your job is to draft, not to think. Do you understand me?" The public rebuke silenced the room. Leo stood his ground, his gaze steady. "I understand, sir, but the numbers are what they are. The current design is not safe." "Then make it safe," Marcus roared, jabbing a finger at the plans. "I don't care what you have to do. Rework the calculations, add whatever you need to. But don't you dare suggest we alter the design. This is the vision. Your job is to make it work. He turned his back on Leo. And I want it done by morning. The message was clear. You will fix my son's mistake, you will do it overnight, and you will receive no credit for it. It was the ultimate humiliation, to be forced to use his superior skill to prop up the inferior work of those who despised him. Leo simply nodded, returned to his desk, and began the long, thankless task, his resolve hardening with every stroke of his pen. The day of the final presentation dawned gray and overcast, the sky a muted canvas that mirrored the heavy tension in the air. The destination was the downtown headquarters of the Blackwood Foundation, an imposing granite building from another era, its halls whispering with the weight of history and immense capital. For the Thorne team, it felt like approaching a citadel. Marcus Thorne was a vision of corporate perfection in a flawlessly tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair impeccably styled. Clarissa was with him, not as a spouse, but as a strategic asset, her presence designed to project an image of dynastic stability and social grace. Julian trailed them, his youthful arrogance tempered by a visible layer of nervous sweat on his brow. They were a family portrait of ambition. Leo was there too, but his role was that of a shadow. He walked a few paces behind them, carrying the heavy presentation boards in a large portfolio case. In his other hand, he held his own worn, brown leather portfolio. He had brought it with him on instinct, a talisman of his own integrity. As they waited in the grand, wood-paneled lobby for their appointment, Clarissa's critical gaze fell upon Leo's personal portfolio. "Still carrying that old thing, Leo?" she remarked, her voice dripping with condescension. "You'd think for an occasion of this magnitude, you'd want to look the part. My husband is trying to present a world-class image. Appearances matter, you know." Leo looked down at the portfolio, its leather softened and darkened with age. He ran a thumb over a deep scratch near the buckle, a mark left from a trip to study vernacular architecture in rural Japan. "It holds things that are important to me, Mrs. Thorne," he said, his voice quiet and even. Her judgment, like her husband's, was based entirely on the surface. They were incapable of seeing the value of anything that didn't glitter. A severe-looking woman with a tablet called their names, leading them down a long, silent corridor to the boardroom. The room itself was intimidating. A single, massive mahogany table, polished to a mirror sheen, dominated the space. On the far side sat the board of directors, 5 men and 2 women, their faces impassive, their posture radiating a quiet, unassailable authority. They were old money, old power. At the head of the table sat a distinguished, white-haired man who introduced himself as Mr. Sterling, the vice chairman. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept over the Thorne contingent, lingering for just a fraction of a second longer on Leo. A flicker of something, not quite recognition, but a thoughtful curiosity, passed across his face before he turned his attention to Marcus. The quiet before the storm descended. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Leo stood against the wall, a silent observer, setting up the presentation boards on an easel. He could feel the desperate, thrumming energy coming off Marcus and Julian, a stark contrast to his own preternatural calm. He wasn't nervous. He felt as though he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He had spent months observing, learning, and preparing. Now, all he had to do was wait for the performance to begin. The Thornes believed this was their stage, their moment of triumph. They had no idea they were merely the opening act in a play that was not their own. Marcus Thorne strode to the front of the boardroom, positioning himself at the head of the great table. He clasped his hands, adopted a look of grave sincerity, and began his performance. His voice, practiced and resonant, filled the silent room. "Members of the board, Mr. Sterling, we are here today not merely to present a building, but to present a vision worthy of the enduring legacy of Arthur Blackwood." His speech was slick, polished, and filled with the kind of empty, grandiose language that passed for profundity in corporate circles. He spoke of synergy, of forward-facing paradigms, of creating a monument of power and influence that would stand as a beacon of philanthropic strength. He was selling a brand, not a building. The board members listened, their faces unreadable masks of polite neutrality. They did not nod, they did not smile, they simply watched. With a flourish, Marcus gestured to Julian, who dramatically unveiled the centerpiece of their presentation, a large, hyper-realistic rendering of the Thorne and Associates design. It was exactly what Marcus had promised, a monument, a towering, intimidating structure of sharp angles, reflective glass, and cold white stone. It looked less like a home for a charity and more like the headquarters of a ruthless galactic empire. It was a building designed to awe, to dominate, to overwhelm. As you can see, Marcus continued, his voice swelling with pride, we have created a structure that is bold, unapologetic, and iconic. It is a testament to the strength and influence of the Blackwood Foundation. He and Julian then walked the board through the features, the soaring four-story atrium designed to impress visitors, the executive suites with their panoramic city views, the private rooftop helipad. They spoke of costs and materials, but they never once spoke of the people the foundation served. They never mentioned the community the building was meant to be a part of. When the presentation concluded, an unnerving silence settled over the room. Marcus stood, beaming, clearly expecting a round of applause, or, at the very least, appreciative murmurs. He received neither. Finally, Mr. Sterling leaned forward, his hands steepled before him. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a scalpel. Mr. Thorne, he began, his eyes fixed on Marcus. It is certainly a structure. I have a question. Your design stands on a 3-acre plot in the heart of the Oak Haven neighborhood. It is a community of families, small businesses, and a public park. I see nothing in your presentation that acknowledges this. Your building seems to turn its back on the very community it will inhabit. How does this serve the Foundation's mission of integration and outreach? The question landed like a stone. It was a direct, surgical strike at the core weakness of the design. Marcus was visibly flustered. He had prepared for questions about budget, about materials, about timelines. He had not prepared for a question about humanity. Well, he stammered, the grandeur of the building will inspire the community. It will be a symbol of aspiration. Julian, seeing his father falter, decided to jump in, a fatal error. We envision it as a destination, he said with a confident smirk. People will come to see the building. The community benefits from the prestige we bring. Mr. Sterling's expression did not change, but a subtle coldness entered his eyes. So, it is a gift you are bestowing upon them, Mr. Thorne. The gift of your prestige? Before Julian could dig the hole any deeper, the main boardroom door opened softly. All heads turned. The severe-looking woman from the lobby stood in the doorway. Mr. Sterling, she said respectfully, the chairwoman is here. She stepped aside, and into the room walked Eleanor Blackwood. She was not the frail, shabby woman from the gala. She was dressed in an impeccably tailored navy blue suit, her white hair styled in an elegant chignon. She carried the same simple wooden cane, but now, in this context, it no longer looked like a sign of infirmity. It looked like a scepter. Her face was calm, her blue eyes sharp and assessing, and she radiated an aura of absolute, understated power. The board members all rose to their feet. Madam Chairwoman, Mr. Sterling said with a warm, respectful nod. The Thornes stared, their mouths agape. Marcus's face drained of all color, leaving a pasty, gray pallor. Clarissa, who had been sitting primly in a chair against the wall, let out a tiny, strangled gasp. Julian looked as if he had been struck by lightning. The blood drained from his face, and his confident smirk dissolved into an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. They were looking at a ghost. The ghost of an old woman they had dismissed as trash, now resurrected before them as the most powerful person in the room. Eleanor Blackwood's gaze swept across the room, passing over the stunned faces of the Thorne family, as if they were pieces of furniture. She gave a small, gracious nod to the board members before her eyes finally settled on Marcus. Her voice when she spoke was perfectly level, devoid of overt anger, which somehow made it all the more devastating. "Mr. Thorne," she said, the name sounding foreign and unpleasant on her lips. "We have met before, at your gala. You may not remember me. I was not dressed for the occasion." The quiet statement landed in the room with the force of a physical blow. The color that had drained from Marcus's face now returned in a hot, painful flush of shame. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could he say? "I'm sorry I treated you like garbage because I thought you were poor?" Clarissa looked like she was about to faint. Her carefully constructed world of social hierarchy and superficial judgment had just collapsed in on itself. The woman she had looked down upon, the woman she had sneered at, was the gatekeeper to the very social stratosphere she was so desperate to conquer. The irony was so thick, so suffocating, she could barely breathe. Eleanor continued, her calm, measured words falling like chips of ice. "My late husband, Arthur, built this foundation on a single, guiding principle. He believed that the true measure of a person or an institution is not found in how they treat their equals and superiors, but in how they treat those they believe to be their inferiors. For months since his passing, I have been observing. I have been listening. I wanted to ensure that the next great chapter of his legacy would be entrusted to people who understood his heart, not just his name." Her gaze shifted, moving past the petrified thorns and settling on the young man standing quietly by the wall. A hint of warmth entered her eyes. "The board has reviewed your proposal, Mr. Thorne, and we thank you for your time," she said, a clear, final dismissal. "However, we have one more presentation to consider. A late submission, one that was solicited by me personally, one that, I believe, truly understands the Blackwood legacy." She looked directly at Leo. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice now filled with undisguised respect, "would you do us the honor?" For a moment, the entire room was frozen. Then, as if in a dream, Leo moved. He walked calmly to the table, his footsteps the only sound in the cavernous, silent room. He placed his old, worn leather portfolio on the gleaming mahogany surface. The contrast was stark, the symbol of his quiet, unpretentious work against the polished veneer of corporate power. He unfastened the buckle and opened it. He did not have glossy, oversized presentation boards or flashy digital renderings. He had a series of detailed, hand-drawn sketches on heavy cream-colored paper and a slim binder containing his notes and technical specifications. He looked up, not at the thorns, but at the board. He made eye contact with each of them, his gaze steady and confident, and then he began to speak. His voice was not the booming, performative baritone of Marcus Thorne. It was a calm, passionate, and intelligent voice that commanded attention through its sincerity. He didn't talk about creating a monument. He talked about creating a community. He spoke of architecture as a service, as a way of fostering connection and offering shelter. He described his design not from the outside in, as a grand object to be looked at, but from the inside out, from the perspective of the people who would use it. He described the way the morning light would filter through the sustainably sourced wooden louvers into the free public library on the ground floor. He talked about the community garden in the central courtyard, where local residents could grow their own vegetables alongside the foundation staff. He explained the building's zero-carbon footprint, the rainwater harvesting system, the seamless integration with the surrounding park. He wasn't just presenting a building, he was telling a story about a place that was humble yet profound, innovative yet timeless, a place of quiet dignity. As he spoke, the faces of the board members transformed. Their impassive masks dissolved, replaced by expressions of genuine interest, of engagement, of dawning excitement. Mr. Sterling was smiling openly now, a broad, warm smile of vindication. He leaned back in his chair, watching Leo with a look of immense pride. When Leo finished, a deep, resonant silence held the room for a beat, a silence not of awkwardness, but of contemplation. He had not only presented a better design, he had exposed the utter soullessness of the Thorns' vision without ever mentioning their names. He had held up a mirror, and the reflection was devastating. It was Marcus who broke the spell. His face was a mottled canvas of fury, desperation, and disbelief. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him, and he refused to accept it. "This is an outrage," he sputtered, finding his voice at last. "This is a complete farce. He's a junior draftsman, a nobody. He works for me. Everything he knows he learned at my firm." The outburst was ugly, a raw display of an ego in its death throes. But Leo did not rise to the bait. He turned slowly, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Marcus's sputtering rage. He looked directly at his now former boss, and for the first time, he let the full weight of his quiet intelligence show in his eyes. This was the moment for the list of grievances, the calm, methodical accounting of every slight, every insult, every act of arrogant dismissal. "You're right, Marcus," Leo said, his voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room. "I do work for you. For now." He took a small step forward. "You told me my ideas for the community library were flights of fancy, and you refused to even look at my sketchbook. But my core concepts somehow found their way into your son's final design." Julian flinched as if he'd been slapped. "You assigned me to fetch coffee for the team working on this very project," Leo continued, his gaze unwavering. "You told me my job was to facilitate the important work of more important people. You told me, in front of our colleagues, that my job was to draft, not to think." Each statement was delivered not with anger, but with the simple, undeniable force of truth. They were not accusations, they were facts. "You believed my worth was defined by my job title at your firm, by the salary you paid me," Leo went on. "You saw my simple clothes and my quiet nature, and you assumed I had no ambition, no vision of my own." Then he turned his gaze to Clarissa, whose face had gone rigid with shock. "And you, Mrs. Thorne," he said, his voice still gentle, but with an edge of steel. "You judged me for this portfolio, for its age, for its lack of polish. You believe that appearances are everything. You judged a woman in need of help by her threadbare coat, just as you judged me by my shabby leather case. But you never once thought to ask what was inside." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The Thorns were exposed, their shallow values laid bare for the entire board to see. They had no defense, because every word Leo spoke was true. They were being undone, not by a grand conspiracy, but by the simple, cumulative weight of their own small cruelties. Eleanora Blackwood stepped forward, her presence sealing their fate. "The board has already reviewed Mr. Vance's proposal in detail," she announced, her voice ringing with finality. "And we have voted unanimously to award the contract for the new Blackwood Foundation headquarters to him. Furthermore," she added, delivering the killing blow, "the foundation will be personally funding the establishment of Mr. Vance's new architectural firm, which will oversee this project and, we hope, many more to come." The room was silent. The reversal of fortune was absolute, a seismic shift in power that was as swift as it was total. But Eleanora wasn't finished. She looked at Marcus, a flicker of something almost like pity in her eyes. "There is one more piece of business, Mr. Thorne. It may interest you to know that the Blackwood Foundation is the primary investor in the holding company that owns the building your firm leases. We also hold a majority stake in the financial institution that underwrites your business loans. Effective immediately, we are calling in those loans and terminating your lease. Your firm, as you know it, is dissolved." The finality of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just a lost contract, it was annihilation. In the space of 10 minutes, Marcus Thorne had gone from a king in his castle to a man with nothing. He staggered back, clutching the edge of the table for support, his face a mask of utter ruin. Clarissa let out a soft, weeping sound, her perfect composure finally shattering. Julian just stood, mute and pale, a hollowed-out shell of the arrogant boy he had been an hour before. Their world had not just been dismantled, it had been vaporized. The weeks that followed the fateful board meeting moved with dizzying speed. The story of the Thorns' spectacular downfall became the stuff of industry legend, whispered about in hushed, cautionary tones at every cocktail party and business lunch in the city. The narrative was irresistible. The arrogant titan laid low by the humble draftsman, the cruel socialite undone by the disguised billionaire. It was a morality play for the modern age, and the Thorns were cast as the villains in their own tragedy. Leo Vance, meanwhile, found his life transformed. He moved out of his small apartment and into a bright, airy studio space downtown, a blank canvas on which to build his new firm, Vance and Bell Associates, named in honor of his late mentor. The space overlooked the very plot of land where the Blackwood headquarters would soon rise. Eleonora Blackwood had been true to her word, providing him with not just the funding, but the unwavering support and wise counsel of her foundation's board. Mr. Sterling became a frequent visitor to the new office. It was during one of their first meetings, over blueprints and coffee, that the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for Leo. "Samuel Bell was my dearest friend," Sterling confided, his eyes misting over with memory. "We went to university together. He was a genius, but he never had the stomach for the kind of self-promotion this business requires. He told me about you, Leo. He said you were the real thing. He asked me to keep an eye out for you, to make sure your talent didn't get buried." He smiled. When Eleanora told me her plan to find an architect who embodied Arthur's values, and mentioned a kind young man at the Thorn Gala, I had a feeling. When your proposal came in, I knew. Sam would be so proud. The revelation washed over Leo, a wave of profound gratitude. He had not been alone after all. A silent guardian, an unexpected ally, had been watching from the wings, waiting for the right moment to step into the light. One afternoon, his new receptionist buzzed him. "Mr. Vance, there's a Mr. Thorne here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." Leo paused for a moment, then sighed. "Send him in." The man who entered his office was a ghost of the titan he had once been. Marcus Thorne's expensive suit hung loosely on his frame. His hair was unkempt, and his eyes, once sharp and commanding, were now dull and bloodshot. He was a man hollowed out by his own hubris. He stood awkwardly in the center of the spacious office, his gaze darting around, taking in the evidence of Leo's success. "It's a nice space," he mumbled. "What can I do for you, Marcus?" Leo asked, his tone neutral, neither warm nor cold. Marcus swallowed hard, his pride warring with his desperation. "I wanted to apologize," he said, the words sounding rusty and unused. "What I did, what we said, it was wrong. I see that now." The apology was clumsy, tinged with self-pity, the lament of a man sorry not for what he did, but for the consequences he had suffered. He got to the real point of his visit. "I was wondering, things are difficult right now. I thought, perhaps, with your new firm, you might have a position for someone with my experience." He was asking for a job, begging for a handout from the man he had relentlessly humiliated. The reversal was complete. Leo leaned back in his chair, his expression calm and thoughtful. He felt a sliver of pity for the broken man before him. But he knew that, "I can't give you a job, Marcus," he said softly but firmly. "This firm is built on a foundation of collaboration, trust, and mutual respect. You spent years demonstrating that you don't value those things." He saw the flicker of anger in Marcus's eyes and held up a hand. "This isn't about punishment, it's about truth. Respect isn't something you can demand back once you've thrown it away. It has to be rebuilt, from the ground up, brick by brick. There are no shortcuts. You have to do the work yourself." Instead of a job offer, Leo wrote something on a piece of paper and slid it across the desk. It was the name and number of a therapist who specialized in career counseling and anger management. "This might be a better place to start building," he said gently. It was an act of profound compassion, but it was not the absolution Marcus had been seeking. Defeated, Marcus took the paper and left without another word. The Thorne family, once a united front of impenetrable arrogance, had shattered under the pressure. Reports trickled back to Leo through the industry grapevine. Julian had fled the city, unable to face the disgrace, and was last heard of working a menial job in another state, his name and connections rendered worthless. Clarissa, stripped of her social standing and her husband's income, had been forced to sell her mansion and move into a modest condominium. Her days were no longer filled with charity galas and designer fittings, but with the quiet, humbling reality of a life without status. The family unit, built on the unstable ground of wealth and appearances, had crumbled the moment the foundation was shaken. 1 year later, the site of the new Blackwood Foundation headquarters was bustling with activity. It was the day of the groundbreaking ceremony, and a hopeful, optimistic energy filled the air. The sun shone brightly, a stark contrast to the gray, overcast day of the fateful presentation. Leo Vance stood at a podium, addressing the crowd of community leaders, foundation staff, and local residents. He looked out at the faces before him, his gaze finally resting on Eleanora Blackwood, who sat in the front row, her face alight with a proud, grandmotherly smile. His speech was brief and heartfelt. He didn't talk about the architectural marvel they were about to build. Instead, he spoke about the principles that had guided its design. "Buildings are more than just steel and glass," he said, his voice carrying clearly over the crowd. "They are shelters. They are gathering places. They are silent witnesses to our lives. The best architecture, I believe, doesn't seek to command our attention, but to earn our trust. It serves the people within and the community around it." This building is a testament to a simple idea, the same idea that guided Arthur Blackwood his entire life, that the greatest strength is found in quiet service, and the greatest worth is found in our shared dignity. As the first shovels of earth were turned, Leo caught a glimpse of a figure standing at the edge of the crowd. It was Marcus Thorne. He was grayer, thinner, but he stood straighter than he had in Leo's office. He wasn't there to ask for anything. He was just watching, a complex expression of regret and perhaps, just perhaps, a glimmer of understanding on his face. He caught Leo's eye, gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, and then turned and walked away. The path to redemption was long, but he had finally taken the first step. In the end, the story of Leo Vance and the Thorne family became more than just a tale of revenge. It became a quiet fable for the city, a reminder that integrity is the only foundation that can truly withstand the test of time. It taught that true vision isn't about how you want the world to see you, but about how you truly see the world. And it proved that sometimes the most powerful and transformative act in the world is a simple, uncelebrated moment of kindness to a stranger, a quiet investment in a shared humanity that pays dividends beyond any fortune. The lesson at the heart of this story is a powerful one. The way we treat people, especially those we think have nothing to offer us, is the truest reflection of our own character. Arrogance builds walls, but kindness builds bridges. Have you ever seen someone completely underestimated prove everyone wrong? We'd love to read your story in the comments below. Thank you for joining us, and if you found this story of vindication satisfying, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more tales that prove that a good heart is the greatest asset of all.